Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, we're going to get a variety of views on the Governor Wolf's recent message to the state legislature, the budget message that is. We're going to hear from the folks from the Pennsylvania State Education Today. But first, a couple of the state's leading reporters are going to, what are they going to do? They're going to give us the big takeaway from the governor's budget address to the Pennsylvania legislature this past week.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, I'm going to do this quickly. It was a huge week in Pennsylvania politics, in Pennsylvania government, however you want to look at it. We now have a Supreme Court decision, Pennsylvania Supreme Court, on why the Pennsylvania Constitution was violated by the 2011 congressional map redrawing. We also have Governor Wolf's annual message to the Pennsylvania legislature. We're going to get into that. We'll take that first with two of the state's leading reporters. We have Katie Meyer. She's the Capitol Bureau Chief, Pennsylvania Public Radio, and I listen to her a lot on WITF. That's okay, isn't it?
Yes.
And I read what this guy writes in the Patriot News. What's that other thing? PennLive. How can I forget that? PennLive. Yep, there you go. John Micek, he's been on the program for most of the 20 years the program has been on the air.
I love when you do that.
All right. I know, but I have to be factual. All right, let's start with it. I'm going to ask you both. I'll start with you, Katie.
Sure.
Give me a couple of the big takeaways from the budget.
Sure. So this is it was a more modest budget proposal than we've seen from Wolf in years past. This is there's not going to be a lot of fights over big tax increases this year. There was really, spending stayed pretty level. It went up by about $1 billion. A bunch of that is mandatory spending that we have to put in there. Two of the big components that you are going to see fights about are natural gas severance tax that Wolf proposed and a minimum wage hike to $12. Now, both of those are also things that Wolf has proposed in all four of his budgets.
Nothing new, right?
It hasn't been successful as of yet. There's been some progress on the severance tax over the last year, even just a couple months, but remains to be seen how that goes. Leadership in the Republican Party does not support it. That's in brief what's in there. A lot more details.
John, take it away.
A curiously underwhelming speech by Wolf. All of 19 minutes long.
Right.
The biggest moment was when he whipped out the Eagles cap and put that on, and everyone down front waving their, they're not terrible towels, whatever they call them.
It's the only standing ovation I've seen him get on the House floor.
Yeah, the longest sustained applause he's gotten in his 4 years. But, Katie's right. The fights are going to be over the severance tax. The fights are going to be over the minimum wage. Senate and House Republicans, when they did their obligatory reaction on the LG's porch out there in the Upper Rotunda, voiced some concerns about the $1 billion in spending that might have to be whittled back. What was kind of funny, though, was watching House Speaker Mike Turzai get up there and do his thing, which sounded for all the world like a speech to the Republican State Committee, which met this weekend for its endorsement session, because he's running for governor. He got up there and said it's going to be up to Republicans to be the adults in the room. We're still waiting for that to happen.
Yeah. What was also fascinating is we have Lieutenant Governor Michael Stack, who was sitting behind the governor as well, and he's got more opponents than I think any lieutenant governor in history has had running for re-election.
6, I think, at this point.
Yeah, and then you have on the other side, Turzai was sitting there, and he's Mike Turzai, and he's running for what's that office? Oh, governor, as a Republican candidate.
Fraught trio there. Yeah.
Now look, as you accurately point out, this was not an overwhelming budget. I thought it was a bit realistic, but both of you hit on something. I can't believe the Republican legislature is going to give him $1 billion overall $1 billion in spending.
Right. And
3.1% more.
Yes, and they're always very cautious about any spending increase. One of the things we heard from Mike Turzai, I think he put it the most maybe strongly, was that the education spending increase that Governor Wolf wants, it's about $250 million increase.
We're going to chat about that.
Yeah, and so that one, education spending is one of those things that's not super controversial, but as I was saying, we have to know where the spending is going, and we have to know what exact results we want from it. And that's been something that a lot of the more conservative Republicans are saying. They're not worried about seeming too harsh about like spending on education, because Terzai, as we know, he's a school choice guy. That means he wants charter schools. He wants schools to be more privatized. So putting a lot of money into public education, I think, is going to be a controversial part of this budget, and that could get kind of nasty.
And you could have mentioned alcohol. He probably no one has been more in favor of the expansion of alcohol since he's been in there.
I mean, you can privatize it. Terzai wants to do it.
Yeah, I mean, you did hear the Republicans credit Wolf for putting more of an emphasis on vocational and technical education. Both Dave Reed and I think and Terzai praised him for that. But Terzai did fault him for not talking about school choice, as if Wolf's going to talk about school choice in his budget address. What's funny though is this spending increase in education roughly lines up with the amount that they want to raise from the severance tax. So that was quite convenient.
I think you would both agree that's probably a non-starter. But listen, John, while I have you here, I want to go to one other thing. June 30 is a deadline. As you know, Governor Wolf's had problems with the Republican legislature getting the budget adopted on time. I think they all want to get out of Dodge, I could say out of Harrisburg. They don't want to remain in the state capitol debating the budget because of the election this year.
Well, correct? I mean, you had Joe Scarnati, the Senate President Pro Tem, talking about a May finish date, which seemed kind of fanciful, but it would be pretty to think so. I mean, but Republicans, though, keep in mind, Terry, are up against a leadership test of their own here.
Great point.
It's a midterm election. Okay. You can have, Democrats could make some inroads. They want to retake the governor's office. It's going to be on them to exhibit some leadership as well. All
right, we've got to get into the whole subject of redistricting, the congressional maps. I know the eyes glaze over, but it's very important, and we'll get to that with these reporters after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
I almost don't know where to start with this, but let's do this takeaway. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court has ordered the Pennsylvania legislature and the governor to get together to agree on a new congressional map. The map in 2011 that was currently being used was declared unconstitutional by the aforementioned state Supreme Court. So here we are. As we tape this, they still have a couple of days to do the map. That is, the legislature. The governor then has a few more days to get through a big deadline, which is February 15. The Supreme Court's supposed to have a map by then, in theory. So what is going on here, Katie? I know you're smiling. We all are a little confused about this.
So I think the thing to stress is there is a very short deadline for this thing. They gave them 3 weeks to draw new maps. This legislature literally had 3 weeks to draft them. It's doable, but it's always been a partisan process, so that makes it tough. Now last night, the Supreme Court finally issued their majority opinion 2 weeks after they made the ruling. So what that means is they finally gave the legislature all the details for why they made this decision, why it's constitutional, more guidelines for drawing a new map. I think a lot of lawmakers had been thinking maybe there'd be some specific guidance on when does a partisan map become too partisan.
And how do you determine what's too partisan?
Exactly.
That's the issue.
But they went with a broader classification on this. They said it has to be compact, it has to be contiguous, it can't split districts. Basically, they took guidelines that had already been in place for drawing state legislative districts and they applied
municipal boundary lines too.
Yes, exactly. And they applied them to the congressional maps.
All right, John, weigh in. I mean, this has to be, it's confusing to us. I don't want to speak for you, but for the folks out there, this is terribly complicated. They could end up with a new member of Congress two members of Congress could be forced to run, sitting members could be forced to run against each other. More than 60 people are running. Now they've invested time and energy and money. They might not even be in the districts as they're reconfigured.
Yeah, I mean, there's huge potential for chaos here. Andrew Crompton, who's the chief counsel to Senate President Pro Tem Joe Scarnati, was saying the other day that they're trying to minimize that to the extent that they don't have to pit two incumbents against each other. They're going to try not to do that. To the extent that they can minimize disruption for voters who might find them, wake up the next day and find themselves with a new member of Congress, they're trying not to do that as well. There are ways to draw maps in such a way where you can minimize that. I'll be curious to see what the final product is.
Yeah. So as we think about this, I mean, the prospects for the Republicans in the state legislature to file another court suit after this legal opinion, and whatever ultimately happens, let's say the Supreme Court has to adopt the map, which they did back in 1992. You can't rule out continued legal.
I think there's certainly going to be continued legal, proceedings one way or another. From what I've heard, and this could obviously change even by the time we see this on TV.
It will change.
But so what we're hearing right now is that they're going to send something maybe to Governor Wolf, see if he vetoes it or not. But it's likely that the court is going to draw this map. And after the court draws a map, if that's what happens, that's going to be maybe fodder for a different kind of lawsuit. As we know before, the U.S. Supreme Court threw this out. They ruled that they weren't going to rule on it. They let the whole thing proceed. But that could change if the state Supreme Court draws this map. And again, it's just, people keep using the word uncharted territory, the phrase uncharted territory, and this is what this is. We're the only state in the country that's happened.
We were there a bit in 1992, but the issues were different, and the court didn't draw a map. They adopted a map that had already been
and I think people are really taking a lot of issue with the court's own reasoning for why it can draw the map.
John, what's really fascinating is that this is so complicated, involved. I don't think lawmakers in either party are going to have to deal with that. Remember, 203 seats up in the state house, one half, 25 in the state senate. Do you think this is going to be I just don't see this emerging, do you, at that level? As
an issue in legislative races? No, I don't think it is. I mean, you sort of had that sort of ridiculous gesture by Representative Chris Dush this week. From Indiana County, circulating a memo for impeachment of the 5 justices, or Democratic justices. But I mean, I don't see that bubbling down to the legislative level in those races. It's not something that has it's directly germane in those contests.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And any way you look at it, I think what's going to be difficult is moving forward is getting Governor Wolf and the legislature. It'll be a Republican drafted plan, whatever it is. It's really going to be hard. It would seem to me hard to get the governor and the legislature on the same page. The governor can always, and it looks like he's preparing his own map, correct? He's going to send a map himself on to the court if they can't agree.
Yes.
Is that crazy?
Maybe. I don't know. It's hard to say what's crazy right now. The sense that we're getting maybe right now is that leaders in the House and Senate are going to draft a map and send it to the governor without just running it by the legislature without a legislative vote, and I guess that's possible.
Yep.
And the governor could well just say nope and send his own map, and then the Supreme Court could say nope and do their own map. We just don't know.
Final word.
It's going to end up in the hands of the court. I think that's the way this is going to go. They're going to draw their own map.
That's a great point. And again, it's not unprecedented. All right, great update. Thanks for coming on. All right, we're going to hear from the folks from the Pennsylvania State Education Association. As Katie pointed out, the education budget moves center stage. It's been a huge priority. Would you agree that maybe the most important priority for the governor since he took office? We'll get to that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Welcome back to the program. Well, as I indicated before, we're going to hear a whole variety of viewpoints. We're going to hear from the folks in education. We're going to hear from the folks in the business community and transportation. We're going to get through this all over the next couple of weeks. It's very important to get a wide variety of views. Sitting across from me now is Rich Askey. He's the vice president from the Pennsylvania State Education Association. Well, the one thing you all in education ought to like is it's been, correct me if I'm wrong, the leading priority for Governor Wolf since he went into office. Rich, would you agree with that or not?
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the reasons why he became governor, that it was important to the people in Pennsylvania that we invest in education. Remember, we took $1 billion worth of cuts in the previous administration, and that showed when the results came out that we were falling behind.
So he wants $1 billion in new spending. $225 million of that would go into the components in education. So let's go through those. I'll let you do the numbers. Basic education, that's the elementary and secondary schools. Do I have that right?
Right.
In the state. So what's he proposing?
That's a $100 million increase for that.
Okay. And that money would be distributed by the legislature and is a formula to
there's a fair school funding formula that is now 2 years in, and it's slowly being implemented, and that's really good news because that helps the children in the state with, it's not based on their zip code. Everybody has a fair shot. Right.
Okay, the other component, and it's as important, and you and I were just chatting off camera about it, how important this is, and you have to be a special person to do this, you have to be a special person to teach it as well as to deal with, the importance of special education. So he's proposed an increase there as well.
Yeah, there's a $20 million increase in special education, which is greatly needed. I mean, those teachers, those kids, and those schools that service them, there's a lot of resources that they need to help these kids be great citizens coming up.
And your previous president, who was on the program very often, was a special education teacher, correct?
Yes, he was an emotional support teacher at a middle school.
Oh, that's now.
God bless him.
Now you're a music teacher, but I won't ask you to sing. Is that okay?
That's perfectly all right. We won't subject everyone to that.
All right. So one of the things that I think we've learned is that we've got to start investing in the education for I'll say it, for kids, because they're kids in preschool and kindergarten at the earliest age, correct?
Absolutely. He's giving $40 million for pre-K studies. And I have to tell you, I taught in Harrisburg for 30 years. What a difference, and at the elementary level, what a difference I saw when we implemented a pre-K, 3-4-year-old program that we did in partnership with Head Start. What a difference I saw as those kids moved through the grade level. You could tell which kids experienced a good pre-K program.
Yeah, I mean, as an educator most of my life, I'm sure I have a bias here, but I'll try to get through that. All right, I want to talk about the governor has linked career and technical education to the health of the economy. Take it away.
Jobs, jobs, jobs.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, it's one of the smartest things in the budget, I think. Our programs, first of all, we already have a great career and tech ed program in a lot of schools across the state. There's a Skills USA competition going on right now, and those winners go on to national, and we always do well. Pennsylvania always does well there. But now with this, we can give them more resources, and it connects employers to kids and the schools so that we can get them their jobs, and Pennsylvania can be a better place to live, work, and learn. Okay, we're going to run to a break. I want to get to higher education when we come back from the break, but importantly, I want to talk about the multiple measures of school and student performance. It's called ESSA. I want to get into that. I know that everybody's heads might spin a little, but this is certainly important about how we gauge school quality. We'll get to that and more after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society, inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine, and by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, advancing quality, improving lives.
Welcome back to the program. I'm chatting with Rich Askey from the Pennsylvania State Education Association. All right, I can't let this go. As a alum of Millersville University and a former professor there, I can't let this go. Higher ed.
Higher ed, $15 million, well-deserved and good for the state.
Yeah. And I do think there has to be some consideration, you know, the big changes that are taking place there, and that's something maybe I'll bring some folks in from higher ed to talk about. All right, ESSA. It's critically important because how you measure schools and school performance is critical, and it's also the public wants it, and it's also important that those of us in education understand how we're measuring performance.
Yeah, the good thing I think about ESSA is that it brings some transparency out there, because there is an actual report that comes out to the community, and it includes achievement. It includes what I think is the most important part, student growth. It also talks about graduation rates.
Right.
And it's also brought in a couple of new things, which I think the really cool one is the career readiness factor.
Right.
So that makes the schools focus on getting those kids ready for their future.
But I mean, what I like about this is that instead of having one measure, I mean, we just can't say, well, we're going to take one test and we're going to use that to define whether schools are successful or not. I mean, when I taught, I hated multiple choice questions to begin with. I was an essay people. I wanted to see if people understood and they could write. And so isn't the advantage of this is the multiple, how do I want to put this, aspects to it, the variety of things that are employed to find out if schools are doing what they should.
Absolutely. The multiple measures is kind of how we refer to it. So
right.
You're real close. It's looking at, like I said, not only just that test, which also, fortunately, the testing time has been reduced by 20%, and they're moving it later into the school year, so you're getting more learning time for those kids before. It makes sense. It absolutely makes sense.
And so how are schools generally, I mean, this is what, the second year for this?
Yes.
So how have the folks in the school districts reacted to this?
Well, we're just into the beginning of the implementation. It was just approved a few weeks ago by the Federal Department of Education.
That's right.
So now they're collecting the data, and it really goes into full implementation in the fall, in this school year. So we'll be looking at schools in the spring being identified for supports and things like that.
I got it. But you would expect that even if there's a change in administrations, that this is likely to remain, and has it been pretty widely, when you talk to folks over in the state legislature, what's the reaction to it?
There's a lot of good reaction to it. I think everybody understands, first of all, you can't just judge a school district, a school, a child on one single test. So there's a lot of good feeling about that, and the multiple measures. So that gives a more holistic look to what the school district is doing, what the school is doing, how the child is growing.
Okay. All right. Well, one of the things we're going to ask you to do is to come back, you know, as this develops and keep us updated, because how we measure schools and student performance is critically important, I think, for the success of the students as well as for the system. All right, we'll see you next week, I hope, for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.